Palestine-Israel Journal. I would like to welcome you all to this event. My name is Ziad AbuZayyad. I'm the founder of Palestine-Israel Journal with the late Victor Sigelman, and now I am the co-editor with the Palestinian co-editor with the Israeli co-editor, Mr. Hillel Shinker. The idea of the PIJ issue about United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 was actually initiated by ENA from Canaan Project in Germany, and without the generous support of the Federal German Representative Office in Ramallah, we could not publish this issue. The purpose of the issue is to memorize for the anniversary of 20 years after the Security Council Resolution 1325 about the role of women in public life and in politics and the state of women under occupation and in wars. And we had actually a very good issue which was translated to German language by Canaan Project and published in German. I will not talk too much about myself. I want is Neko with us? Is not. Okay, we will be joined later by the deputy representative of the German office, Mr. Neko, but now we'll move to Enna, our partner in this project. Please, Enna, introduce yourself and make your introduction.
Yes, dear guests, as chair of the Berlin-based association that founded the Canaan Project in 2013 and partner in publishing a special issue of the PIJ devoted to the UNSCR 1325, I also welcome you warmly and gratefully to this launch event. Our quest is to have Resolution 1325 translated into political reality at all levels. Protection of women's rights during wars and under occupation, as well as equal participation of women at peace tables. We want international law and human rights to be respected and implemented by all governments, so that ecological survival and social coexistence take place based upon rules and principles that everyone abides by, so that everyone lives better. That's quite simple. But that is where the problem lies. In fact, at least since the beginning of written documentation. Before moving to Canaan, it is said that Moses was bestowed with stone tables, the one with 10 commandments and prohibitions. And among them are 3 very clear instructions. You shall not lie, you shall not steal, you shall not kill. One would think that these 3 instructions would be so simple that everyone would understand them, even men. But some find themselves particularly clever, astute, and smart in interpreting them in a way that only the others have to abide by the rules, while they themselves can lie, steal, or kill. And they especially like to do so under the pretext of religion or national duty. That didn't work out so well with the simple 10 commandments. After the last World War, in which about 64 million people were deprived of their lives, binding rules were again drawn up in the form of the United Nations Charter, which was intended to free future generations from the scourge of war. The basic laws, don't lie, steal, and kill, were packed in 111 articles. And the founding states laid down mechanisms to ensure peace and security. And even this set of rules is formulated in such an accessible way that anyone could understand and implement them, even men. But 76 years later, the reality is still different. Our daily life is dominated by some people who lie, steal, or kill, and they do so especially under the pretext of religion or national duties. And in this respect, religious zealots of Christian, Muslim, or Jewish faith but also neighboring monarchs, casino owners, arms producers, or real estate tycoons do not differ from each other. The personal or economic interest of a small and antisocial minority override the interest of the majority for a safe, fear-free, and prosperous life. There is an invisible wall between civil society and this small but dominating elite, and this wall has to fall. So in fact, the UNSCR 1325 borders on a miracle, because it enables us women for the first time in history to influence and control governments, theoretically, because far too few women know what a powerful instrument we have in our hands if used strategically and purposefully. It is therefore great that Hillel and Ziad immediately agreed to the proposal to dedicate again an issue of the PIJ to the United Nations Resolution 1325.
Please,
another compass for the political world.
Please respect the 3 minutes time allocated for you.
I do.
You're taking more than your time.
I'm convinced that the 1325 and that women networks will grow larger, and that the 3 pillars of social coexistence, like nonviolence, transparency, and non-greed, will become more prevalent in the future. So thank you, Ziad and Hillel. Thank you to all our precious authors who contributed to this issue. Thank you all dear guests who are interested in this launch event and in the issue. And I hope we will continue together to work for this goal.
Thank you, Ina, for reminding us what we really should keep in mind. I think we should state the basis for 1325, as you may recall, was basically 3 principles or justifications. The first is that women should be part of peace negotiations and security issues by right, because we are 50% or more of the population. So it's a question of rights. The second is that women are victims, and increasingly over the past 100 years, women and children, civilians have been major victims in the wars we have seen. And the third reason or basis for the 1325 is that women would bring something different. I don't think we have much of an argument about the first 2. It's our right as half of the population, and we are indeed victims. We are affected by wars. But when it comes to what we bring that's different, I think we have to take a look at that. We're not sure. I mean, certainly we're different. Women are different from men in every class, every ethnic group. But women between themselves are certainly not the same. And if the implication is that women are going to bring a more peaceful attitude to the table, we have no proof of that. There are some studies that say here and there women have been more peaceful. But I think that it's important that we remember that the issue isn't just adding women, numbers of women. And there is an educational value to having women at the table, so people can see that women are there and have a right to be there. But I think we also have to be careful about what we bring to the table and which women. We have to ask which women and which men are we bringing to the table? Will they contribute? Will they be interested in women's rights? Will they be interested in peaceful resolution of conflict? Will they be interested in these things? What are they bringing to the table? And so my criticism of 1325, as important as it is that it's not a question of numbers. It isn't just a matter of bringing women and adding them, but we have to ask these questions to see what it is that women can bring to the table. And that only can be answered when we know which women we're bringing and which men we're bringing to the table. Lucy, you want to add?
Thank you, Galia. Just to welcome everyone and introduce myself and Galia. We actually coordinated the articles for this very special issue of the Palestine-Israel Journal. And this was partly because we had in fact done this 10 years ago also in 2011. And we were really grateful for this opportunity from the German Representative Office and the Canaan Project to produce another journal and really take a look at this extremely important resolution. As Galia has pointed out, there's many things that are important, but also to be questioned. What emerged most out of the wide variety of articles in this issue was the amount of potential that remains with 1325, but it hasn't really been enacted. How many of you know, for instance, that Afghanistan endorses 1325 and has passed its national action plan in 2015? Afghanistan, which did not in the end really include women in negotiations and which is now facing such a catastrophe. It's not enough just to have even a government endorsement. There has to be real structural change. There has to be, again, this came out in some of the articles, there has to be structural shifts. There has to be a shift in mindset away from military security to human security. Again, Afghanistan shows the impossibility of achieving any form of human rights or democracy or peace-based system when you're using military power. If you want to achieve peace, you have to work with peaceful means, and you have to be inclusive in your approach and shift your mindset from military to human security. This is going to be a discussion where we focus on 1325, look at perhaps some of the gaps, and look perhaps if we get a chance at the end during the question and answer session, will it be possible to actually do something with this? What can we do in our own contexts to build on this potential that we would like to build on? Again, welcome. I see already 62 participants. This is wonderful news. Thank you all for coming. I know people get zoomed out very easily, so we appreciate it. And I would like to hand over now to Galia to introduce
Lucy,
yes.
may I interrupt for 1 minute?
You're a man, Ziad, I'm not sure.
No, just one minute. You know, one of the hazards which we experience is traveling between Ramallah and Jerusalem. And our friend Nico Fletcher, I hope I'm pronouncing his name properly, he had just joined us from Ramallah.
That's wonderful. Okay.
Nico is the first secretary at the German Representative Office in Ramallah. He's also in charge of culture, press, and other things. I want to welcome Nico, and please give him the microphone so he can say a few words on behalf of the German Representative Office and the Foreign Ministry of the Federal Republic of Germany. Nico, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Ziad. Also, thank you to Hillel for your understanding. You know, we've just been on the phone. Indeed, it was somehow a hassle to get from Ramallah to Jerusalem today. I had another meeting before in Ramallah and we were stuck in traffic jam. My sincere apologies for that, and my sincere apologies for being too late to your wonderful round of discussion. But I'm glad I was able to join now. And thank you very much for the kind words, Ziad. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to hear and listen to your discussion you will have today. And I send my regards from the German Representative Office, also from our new head of mission, Mr. Oliver Oftscher, who has come to Palestine just 4 weeks ago. He's very new now, but also from our former head of mission, Mr. Christian Klages, and Ziad and Hillel. You know, you've been in touch with him. He has been a friend of the Palestine-Israel Journal, and he was also very, very supportive of the funding we have given to you. So this is really a good relationship we have had. It's already the second issue we are funding of the Palestine-Israel Journal, and I hope it's not going to be the last one. But I think it's a very, very great product, you know, with a very diverse content and such a great spectrum of contributions in the article, and all the different contexts, the different perspectives and different point of views regarding 1325. So I think it's really a great basis for the discussion today. And we are very, very happy to have had the honor to fund it. And yeah, I hope it's going to be a discussion as fruitful as the issue itself today. And I hope it will mirror also the diversity of all the contributions made to the issue. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And thank you again very much for giving us the possibility to cooperate with you. It's been a pleasure, and I hope it will be a pleasure in the future as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and you are welcome. Lucy, I will not interfere anymore. No more interruption.
Yeah, that was fine, and we really are grateful.
Yes,
for the contribution of Germany to making this issue possible. To you, Ina, and also to you. We're going to turn to our panelists now, and we're going to open with Professor Francis Raday, who's a very well-known Israeli feminist who has been involved. He's a professor emerita of the law school of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and she is now the president of the Concord Research Center for Integration of International Law in Israel. And she's one of the top international lawyers and labor lawyers in Israel. But also she was very active as a member, as a rapporteur at the UN Human Rights Council, and also as an expert attached to, if I can use that word, to the CEDAW discussions at the United Nations. So I think that we have no one better to open our panel. Francis, please. Unmute, you have to unmute.
Yes, thank you very much, Galia, for the introduction. And thank you, Ina, Galia, Lucy, Nico, Hillel, and Ziad for introductions that are an integral part of what we're going to talk about now. I put up a short presentation. Would you like to share my screen, whoever's controlling it, or shall I do it? I'll share my screen. I can see that. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfect. Good.
You can, good. Okay, so I'm going to give you a short introduction to the resolution, and hope that there are going to be questions about it afterwards. The resolution 1325 was unanimously adopted by the United Nations Security Council on the 31st of October 2000. I mean, it's quite surprising because it's a very male-dominated institution, the Security Council, and itself represents a lot of the past ethos of men discussing war and peace. But it was adopted by them, and the resolution recognized, this is very important, the disproportionate and unique impact of armed conflict on women, that's on one hand, and on the other hand, the undervalued and underutilized contributions women make to conflict prevention, peacekeeping, conflict resolution, and peace building. The adoption of this resolution by the Security Council marks actually a landmark change of paradigm. It challenges the traditionally masculinized and militaristic peace and security realm, which has excluded and excludes the experiences and contribution of women. And takes a wider view, the resolution takes a wider view of human security, as Lucy called for, which encompasses personal and economic security for women and the prevention of gender-based violence. The resolution requires women's participation, full and equal participation in decision-making. It stresses the importance of that participation, of women's participation as active agents in peace and security governance, protection from sexual violence, conflict prevention, and post-conflict peace building, for example, writing constitutions. They point out that implementing women's participation requires empowering diverse women's civil society organizations, which addresses some of the problem that Galia addressed about who is going to participate. And women's civil society organizations should take part in political decision-making through effective processes of consultation. There are 3 pillars of policy involved in the conflict and peace-building process: prevention, protection, and participation. Well, we'll look at each of them. Prevention. Though we know and we have seen many women leaders who are not particularly gender equality inclined, who are not particularly peace inclined, we do have one way of looking at the importance of women's involvement in that societies which have a high level of gender equality seem to be better placed to prevent armed conflict. Gender equality, as has been found, is a stronger predictor of a state's peacefulness than its level of democracy or its gross domestic product. Where gender equality is the guideline, a state is less likely to use violence, to abuse human rights, to commit torture, experience civil conflict, or go to war. Now, that does not mean that gender equality prevents armed conflict. What it means is that the two, gender equality and peacefulness, are corollaries, and each reinforces the other. Both of them are the product of a society's democratic, transparent, and rational governance, which entrenches respect for human rights. As conflict involves 2 or more sides, it is the countries that share these values which are best placed to avoid violent measures in the face of conflicting interests or narratives. The second of these pillars is protection. As Galia pointed out, civilians, particularly women and children, account for the vast majority of those adversely affected by armed conflict, including as refugees and internally displaced persons, and increasingly they are targeted by combatants and armed elements. Women and girls additionally are exposed in some cases, in many cases, to sexual abuse by peacekeeping personnel, well, not by combatants, and sometimes, occasionally, by peacekeeping personnel as well. They are also directly affected emotionally and economically by the tragic trauma and loss of lives of young male soldiers who are their family members and frequently sole or joint breadwinners. The resolution calls for special measures to protect women and girls from gender-based violence and to prosecute those responsible for crimes against humanity and war crimes, including those relating to sexual and other violence against women and girls. And they call for respect for the civilian and humanitarian character of refugee camps, taking into account the particular needs of women and girls, including in the design of the camps. And the third pillar is participation. The resolution stresses the importance of women's equal participation and full involvement in all efforts for the maintenance and promotion of peace and security, and the need to increase their role in decision-making with regard to conflict prevention and resolution. The participation of women is central to the resolution, and it is indeed a demonstration of the shift of the perspective which has seen war as men's realm. However, and here I agree with Galia, the presence of women as such cannot guarantee the incorporation of a gender perspective. And for that, both the identity of women participants and their commitment of the women participants and the male participants to feminist analysis and agendas are requisite. In our, then the So it has to be both the participants and the policy. As regards the way that this resolution 1325 should be empowering the women in our region, there is indeed an urgent need to apply resolution 1325 to the basic constitutional and social regimes and the peace and the conflict resolution processes of both sides. Neither Israel nor this whole region do well on gender equality as an indicator for peaceful solution of conflict. The region has the lowest performance in gender gap rating in general and in political participation of women in particular globally. While out of 153 countries, Israel is ranked 64, well beneath the average in OECD countries with the same level of income, in part because of the low level of women's political participation. In the Palestinian-Israeli context of ongoing occupation, settler colonialism, and de facto annexation, where power relations are not symmetrical, the onus is on Israel to promote an alternative to violent confrontation with a two-state solution which can realize the aspirations of both peoples to self-determination. And it is on the Palestinian leadership to respond. The full participation and empowerment of women, both Palestinian and Israeli, in conflict prevention, protection of civilians, and peacekeeping could significantly contribute to changing a militaristic paradigm as a solution to conflict. I'll finish there. I hope I haven't taken more than my 5 minutes, so I hand it back to the chair.
Thank you. Lucy,
Yes.
present our next speaker.
Yes, thank you so much, Francis. That was a pleasure to listen to, so clear. And I liked particularly the point about gender equality and peacefulness being corollaries, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
I would now like to present Huda Abuarquob, who is the Regional Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, ALLMEP, and also an active leader in grassroots Palestinian and Israeli initiatives focused on feminist, inclusive political activism, FIPA, and an advocate of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. I think this makes an excellent sequel to where Francis just finished. Huda, all yours.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Galia. Thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be part of the family of the Palestinian-Israeli Journal and also supported by Canaan Project to do this. I'm not going to take too much time. We are all familiar with 1325, and I'm going to specify or focus my notes on the Palestinian context. There is an issue when it comes to implementing UN resolutions when it comes to Palestine since 1948. So there is no mechanism of implementation, and 1325 is not that different. There is no accountability when it comes to the consequences of not implementing any UN resolution, and 1325 also is no exception. I acknowledge the fact that the Palestinian Authority have worked on different levels in order to create an action plan in Palestine, but I argue, as I did in my article contributing to that edition specifically, that very few women in Palestine are aware of 1325 and its articles. And that is due to the fact that the whole conversation on 1325 is, and excuse me for using the term, elite controlled. In the Palestinian society, which we cannot afford any kind of elitism when it comes to our struggle, the 1325 resolution is a conversation taking place in very, very closed rooms, sometimes hotels, and in a complete disconnect from reality on the ground. And yes, I would say that the occupation has to do with everything that is going wrong with our life in Palestine. The Israeli occupation has a huge influence on women's status, rights, and representation. It targets every aspect of the human security women in Palestine have or need. It changes the fiber of the Palestinian society. It pushes women to feel and act all the time as if they as victims, paralyzes them when it comes to their call to move forward on issues that has to do with women's rights in Palestine. But if the Israeli occupation ends tomorrow, and it should end today, not tomorrow, but if it ends tomorrow, I don't think that women in Palestine will enjoy freedom, security, and justice. The social, economic, and political norms in Palestine continue to keep women down, ignore their rights, and see women as less than men. Therefore, while we all struggle to end the Israeli occupation, we must continue struggling for fair representation for the women who in Palestine who are standing by men when it comes for calling for freedom and justice and ending the occupation, yet they are not presented. And if they are always attacked because they are women and their job is not to be speaking on behalf of men. So internal cultural and political and socio-economic dynamics must be addressed first before we come with fancy terminology about women's freedom. I would also argue that in our call for a more women representation in every walk of our lives, we actually don't have models to follow. And this is a failure on women's activism in general. Because what women do in the world, when they come to the political arena, they are obliged to comply with the game of politics, which is man-made, and nothing is against men. I'm not here to otherize. If any, I am calling for a full partnership with men. Otherization is another form of discrimination, and I refuse to use it. But there is no model, and as women, we have failed to produce a model that for the young Palestinians, Israelis, young women all over the world to follow. The last model that we had and we looked at was Margaret Thatcher. And so there is a need to change that. I would also argue that when we push agendas from the outside, we actually give the opposers a fertile environment to refuse cooperation because it's an agenda coming from NGOs, foreign entities, etc. I think it's about time for us as women in Palestine, but also in Israel, to localize feminism, localize 1325. There is nothing wrong with being inclusive in bringing more voices into the fold in order to change the way we are looking at 1325. Yes, there is a national action plan both in Palestine and Israel. And in fact, Palestine was second to Iraq in the Arab world to create that. Yet, I would argue that if I talk to teachers near my house, they have never heard of 1325. It's a foreign concept. And I think this is from, as a call, I will end with, it's important to create a space to localize, culturalize 1325 in order for it to speak to the needs women in a certain context in Palestine live through. In my article, I wanted to bring the voice of the less privileged in the Palestinian society. So I claim that I'm speaking on behalf of the women who you wouldn't be seeing on a panel like this, but I'm hoping that I brought their voice somehow to this panel. And I wanted particularly to thank Sister Jayanti for bringing that piece about inner peace. Women need to be in touch with that inner peace. So for them to be liberated from the systems around us that oppress us. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sorry that I have to leave at 5. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Huda. That was so inspiring. And really, you brought out so brilliantly the complexities around the occupation and the elitism and the need really for localization of 1325. Thank you very much. Let us go now to Naveen, who also has to leave at 5. Naveen Sanduka is an expert in the field of program development, management, peace building, and gender issues. She has achieved her MA in Democracy and Human Rights from AbuZayyad and currently works with the German Association for Development Cooperation. She is also the executive director of Our Rights, Hukukuna, a new NGO based in Jerusalem, which focuses on civic and political rights of Palestinians in East Jerusalem, especially women, and runs a grassroots initiative called Judy, From Me to You, which aims to bring women together. She is a civil society representative of the International Reference Group for the World Council of Churches. Naveen?
Hi, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to be talking among you all and giving us the opportunity to speak specifically about the situation of women in Jerusalem. I'm an advocate that always wants to advocate for having Jerusalem in every single event, because Jerusalem has such a very special context. That said, I'm going to start by thanking Huda, of course. First of all, we're going to be in the same meeting. So obviously it gives you kind of like, where are the women going and who we are. But yeah, I'd like to thank Huda because I think she touched upon many points that I wanted to actually raise as well. So as a woman in Jerusalem, I'm involved in somewhat, let us say, political activism, somehow in some meetings that are related to Track 2. And what inspired me to write this specific article is the fact that I'm always seeing the same faces. There's, or hearing the same names, but like, where's the younger generation? What is happening with the 90% of the women in Jerusalem who we don't hear their voices and who are the ones mostly affected by the situation in Jerusalem? And that led me to some sort of an historical research about, where women were in Jerusalem. Back to the 20th century, in 1929, actually, apparently women were very active in Jerusalem to an extent that they did a convening in Jerusalem for the Palestine Arab Women's Congress. And at that time, they were already talking about their role in the society. And historically speaking, women also led charitable organizations, or many orphanages in Jerusalem were established also by women. Maybe at the political level, they weren't that active, but definitely at the social and charity work, they were very active indeed. As well as if we move forward to 1961, another example is a conference such as the Asian African Convention that was held in Cairo. And basically the Palestinian women in that conference, especially women from Jerusalem, were able to identify or recognize Israel as a colonial entity. It was the voice of women who was able to influence such a convention at that time. Now, following that, if we look at the role of women after the annexation of Jerusalem after 1967, what we see is that many, and this is interesting, this is where the political starts to influence the participation of women in Jerusalem particularly as well. We start to see that Israel itself doesn't recognize the Palestinians in Jerusalem as citizens. It gave them the residence status. By that status on its own, we cannot participate. Our political participation is limited. We cannot participate in elections at the national level, and we cannot nominate ourselves either. That said, at the same time, because East Jerusalem is annexed, we decide and we choose not to run for the municipal elections, because then that would be some sort of recognition that Jerusalem is unified and it is the capital of, East Jerusalem is also the capital of Israel. So it's kind of like the national aspirations is also kind of affecting our political participation as well. Another law that was also implemented, that we in Jerusalem, as in general, as men and women, we cannot actually form political parties, and we cannot be part of political parties that exist in Palestine, in the West Bank and in Gaza, because otherwise we are going to go to prison, or our residency is going to be revoked, or our houses are going to be demolished. So it's kind of already by law, the context where we live, the legal framework already puts a lot of pressure on the political activism as residents of Jerusalem. Nevertheless, in the 70s, we see the political parties, Palestinian political parties, decided to frame the work of the Palestinian women. So they start engaging women from urban, rural, refugee camps in political activism in those different political parties. And in the 80s, with the first Intifada, we see names like Zahira Kamal, for example, Sama Weda, what's her name? Dr. Hanan Ashrawi as well. So we hear those names that are actually very active during the first Intifada. And then interesting to note that during the first Intifada, we have the Orient House in Jerusalem, and we also have the Chamber of Commerce in Jerusalem. We have many civil society organizations that were considered as the hub for political activism in general in Jerusalem. And if we see the role of women in that period, we see them as equal as men. So they were also participating in demonstrations. They were also writing political pamphlets. They were also involved generally in the political sphere. Now, that's interesting because from one side, politically, they were active, but socially, it was still not accepted. So for example, a woman who went to prison in the Israeli prison based on national basis would be later on maybe regarded as, have done something wrong, maybe it's some sort of a social backlash, let us say, for their political participation, even though it was accepted, like that this is a national struggle, but this still socially, it wasn't accepted for a woman to go to Israeli prison. Going fast forward, the Oslo period and what happened afterwards. For me, I always consider Oslo to be a turning point in the Palestinian history, but specifically in Jerusalem. Because after Oslo, we saw the political parties wanting to gain positions in the new entity that is formed, the Palestinian Authority. And basically, it was ruled by men. All these women who contributed during the first Intifada and even before that were totally neglected. And the different positions, leadership positions were given to men, and women were allowed to form some sort of an entity where, okay, this is for women. And I remember hearing this when I started working in this field, that every time as women we wanted to push gender issues or we wanted to push our participation, we always received the feedback, not now, until we finish from occupation and we have our liberated, independent Palestine. That is when women can actually participate and we can then talk about women's rights. So wait, we always hear that story. Now in Jerusalem specifically, what happened is that after the closing of the Orient House, the closing of the Chamber of Commerce, the building of the separation wall between the West Bank and Jerusalem, what happened is that we saw the economic also center, not only the political, but also the economic center moving to the West Bank. What does that mean for women in Jerusalem? It means that, first of all, 77% of the population in Jerusalem, and this is according to Israeli official statistics, are under the poverty line. It also means that less and less women are actually being educated. So according to statistics between the ages of 24 and 64, 44% did not continue 12 years of education. This is how bad it is for women in Jerusalem in sense of education. So it's poverty, lack of education, economic center doesn't exist, and we have social restrictions. And on top of that, if we wanted to have any kind of political participation, it will be, you know, with the municipality, that then it's going to be regarded as normalization. So we don't participate either. I'm trying to, I know I'm taking time, so I'm trying to go very, very fast forward in this. So, but we also kind of see that there is good examples where some women in Jerusalem, they try to improve their living situation by working with the municipality, not on representation, but by holding the municipality, for example, accountable that, okay, we want, for example, a clean street. We as taxpayers, we're asking for our right to have a clean street.
Naveen,
that's the maximum that they can do.
I'm going to have to ask you to
I'm stopping. Shortly. I'm stopping now. That's why I know. So so basically, that's the situation of women actually in Jerusalem. And I just also wanted to mention one last form of activism that exists, which is the women who belong to religious parties, and those women actually constantly are present in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they see their role as the protectors of Al-Aqsa. And by that I'll stop, because I don't think I have time to talk about the religious role in Jerusalem. And thanks for your time.
No, thank you. I'm so glad that you brought us to Jerusalem. As a former Jerusalemite, I'm delighted. But also it's a very important, and I hated to have to make you stop. But thank you very much. And actually, I want to turn now to another Jerusalemite, and that's Naomi Chazan, who was born and raised in Jerusalem. And she and I were active in creating the Jerusalem Link, which during the first Intifada. Naomi Chazan is a professor emerita of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She left the university to go into the Knesset. And in the Knesset for many years, she was most active also on women's issues, but also in security issues. And she was deputy speaker of the Knesset. When she left the Knesset, she created and runs a center for women in public life. So Naomi is still one of our most active feminists, along with Francis and others. I don't see you on this, Naomi, but I know you're here. So I want to turn the floor over to you. Where are you?
Thank you very much, Nadia. I'm here. And good afternoon, good evening to all. It really is once again a pleasure to be on an event of the Palestine-Israel Journal. I want to thank Ziad and Hillel and Lucy and Galia and our friends from Germany and the Canaan Project for all your support. I want to go back for a minute and remind all of us that the absolutely essential building block of 1325 is that there is a close connection between violent conflicts and gender inequality. And the purpose of 1325 is to break that asymmetry on both ends, both on the political end and also on gender inequality. I want to go fast forward for 1 second to 2021. It's not only a question of violent conflict, it's also a question of global catastrophes, including COVID-19. You see the very same connection between a pandemic, a catastrophe, and the depressed status of women. And the purpose of this entire undertaking is to rearrange the connection. On the one hand, to empower women and protect them. And on the other hand, create the conditions that don't make it possible to continue this form of subjugation through political action. That's the broad, significant mission of 1325 and its offshoots today. Having said that, my article in this particular issue deals more with the Israeli side and the Israeli-Palestinian side. And I frankly so much welcome the critical analysis that I've heard here this afternoon, because it is impossible to glorify 1325 without showing that the mistakes were made and much, much needs to be done. There are 3 clear periods of 1325 in the Israel-Palestine conflict. The first period, the initial period right after the adoption of the resolution, which Francis explained so wonderfully, there was a balance between the gender elements and the political elements. And therefore, the importance of protection increasingly was concretized and made palpable primarily because of Israeli occupation and overrule in the occupied Palestinian territory, which adversely affects all Palestinians, but primarily women. That's protection. Number 2, on the participation issue, representation is important, but as Galia noted, the importance of representation only if there is diversity and women committed to feminist perspectives and values, or otherwise it's meaningless. And number 3 is the question of feminist perspectives, and we get that through diversity. For the first decade, almost decade, in Israel-Palestine, you had a nice balance, and almost nobody talked about prevention. Why? Because we were in the midst of a conflict. Prevention is great in Norway, but it's a problem here. Towards the end of the first decade, we began to see a deterioration. Phase 2, split. Israeli women and a new right-wing government with, frankly, almost no horizon for any kind of understanding on Israel-Palestine issues, brought Israeli women to spend more time on developing the gender aspects of the equation at the expense of the political ones. 1325 was depoliticized, and 1325 is an extremely political instrument, and we have to keep remembering that. On the Palestinian side, the opposite happened. The question of protection became more acute, and the political issues became more acute, because it was clear that without resolving the political issues, one won't be able to resolve the gender equality issues. So you got a deviation and a lot of tension and much less contact. I think we're entering a third phase now. I call it a repoliticization phase of 1325. And I want to emphasize that this repoliticization is taking place by the next generation, or maybe even 2 generations beyond us. That means you heard Naveen You heard Huda. This is a different kind of discourse. Diversity is important. Political activism is important. And feminism, not just gender equality, but feminism. And when you put it together, we're beginning to get a new discourse, and I think a very welcome one. It's not yet gelled. And our challenge today is to see how to update, and I agree, specify, Huda, in real terms regarding the situation on the ground with a bottom-up approach, but also we need the top-down approach and the meeting places to make a real difference. The conflict is at a standstill. Its resolution is at a standstill. I think the world needs more women doing much more demonstrable work than we succeeded in doing in the past 20 years. Thank you.
Okay. Lucy.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I've been taking notes on all of that. There was so much, so much in it, but very interesting actually, and encouraging what you say about this third phase. I agree. I think things are perhaps starting to move, or at least be movable, even if they're not starting to move independently, and that it's really a time when the younger generation can start to take the lead. And
if I can just put in a word here to pick up on one thing that Naomi said, and I think Francis earlier, and this is the issue of feminism. And I think one has to understand feminism. The essence of feminism is an appreciation of power relations. That's why men can be feminists as well as women. And that's why feminism seems to be connected in such an integrated way with what we're talking about, because it's an appreciation and an understanding of power relations, whether it's occupier and occupied, it's men versus women. And I think that's a key that we have to look to. When I talk about which women I want in negotiations or in power, it's feminists who think about and represent or see themselves as representing women's rights, but also who have this appreciation of power relations. And I think that's key to anything that's connected with conflict resolution. But I don't want to take time from our last speaker. Lucy?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Galia. That's really important. And 1325 is a key to changing these power relations. This is what we have to do with it, to work with it. I would now, though, like to have the pleasure to introduce Sister Jayanti. She is a European and Middle Eastern director of the Brahma Kumaris, founded in India in 1937. Brahma Kumaris is the largest spiritual organization in the world, led by women, and a worldwide spiritual movement dedicated to personal transformation and world renewal. It exists in over 110 countries on all continents and is accredited at the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. Sister Jayanti, we are looking forward to hearing what you will tell us about personal spiritual transformation.
Thank you so much to the organizers, and I have been transfixed by each and every one of the speakers, and so a grateful thanks to each and every one of you. And yes, the organization promotes women's empowerment so that they are trained to become teachers and leaders and bring about positive, constructive transformation, not only in the self, but also within society. And hopefully with everyone's finger of cooperation, surely it's possible to also transform the world. I believe that implicitly. And I want to begin with something that one of our esteemed speakers had said. And she spoke about a change in the mindset. And I believe that everything begins inside, within the mind. How can it begin in my feet or in my hands or in my toes? It begins inside the human consciousness, the human mind. And because of that transformation of the human mind to a mindset of peace and a commitment to peace, yes, then definitely what we can do is create peace within our families, we can create peace within our country, and definitely, yes, the world. That is the vision that we hold. But I also want to mention how it was so very important to hear about moving away from military security to people security. And I think the tragic story of Afghanistan has its own tale to tell us, and hopefully to teach us, because that was $3 trillion spent on military training and intervention. And what was the amount spent on education and human rights and everything else that is needed? Well, you can guess. And so it becomes absolutely vital at this moment to remember something that has been stated in the charter, the preamble of the Charter of UNESCO. Wars begin in the minds of men, and that's generic, so that includes all of us. But it states that wars begin in the minds of men, and the defenses of peace have to be built therein also. So unless we are talking about peace education, unless we begin to understand that peace begins on an inner level within each and every individuals, not just those who are here, but every individual, it's not going to be able to bring about peace within an area or a region or the world at large. And so how do I set about this? What can I do to make sure that this can happen? It begins when I say, I am responsible for creating my own state of value for the self, self-esteem, and also self-empowerment. Peace is not sitting back passively and waiting for something to happen to me. Peace is a power. Peace is something that can bring about transformation within myself, so that I'm able to embrace humanity as my family. There are too many problems facing humanity. COVID was the beginning, but I'm thinking about climate change. And the only way that truly we can have human rights for all, equity for all, is when we begin with ourselves, and it starts with peace. And I know that all of you have had a glimpse of peace and a glimpse of the vision of what peace can bring about. And I just hope that if we begin our day with focusing on that vision of peace in our world, together we'll be able to make it. And I believe that is absolutely our right. A human right is to be able to experience peace and together create a world of peace. But I do think that women are the instruments at this moment in history who can be trusted with bringing about peace in the world. But we have to empower ourselves with the power of peace, and I'm sure it can work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I don't know if we have time. Hillel, Ziad, do we have time for questions and answers, or have we gone over our time? Ultimately, it's the men who rule, and you're ruling.
No, it's not a man issue. We have been warned from the very beginning of the meeting about male chauvinism, so we will not practice it.
Do we have time for questions?
You are the moderators, and I told you in many emails that when you take over your job, you are the rulers, you are the kings of this meeting.
Okay.
Myself and Hillel, we are listening. But you and Lucy, you have the power to decide how to continue, till when to continue. It's your decision.
Okay, Ina, you're controlling the Zoom. So could you take a look at the chat box? And if there are some questions, maybe we could take 2 questions or maybe 3 and try to, first of all, know who they're directed to. Let me take a look as well.
I am controlling the chat. Until now, I only saw messages to our precious speakers and the question if this recording is available, which is, and I'm trying to leave our email addresses so that we receive the requests by email. And
excellent.
There is now a hand raised by Netta Levy.
Okay, let's do it also with either a raised hand or with a message in the chat. I think we have about 15 minutes for questions, and it would be really nice. That was such a rich set of presentations. I would love to hear reactions.
So may I?
Yes, go.
Okay, thank you so much. So it was a fascinating debate. I listened to most of it because I have 3 kids in isolation with me. But I'm Netta Levy, I'm an advocate from Itach Ma'aki with you, Women Lawyers for Social Justice NGO, and we've been promoting 1325 for many years. And in the last year and a half or so, together with Huda and Nivin, we also created a joint working group steering committee. And my question is about whether this is some kind of a dilemma that I think we have, and I would love to hear your thoughts about whether you think it is time. And Naomi talked about the 3rd phase. So whether it's time for a joint to invest more efforts in a joint actions to implement 1325 and its principles, or to continue, in my opinion, to continue investing most of the efforts in the local, we as Israelis within Israel and the Palestinian activists within Palestine. So this was my question.
Wow, that's a nice, easy question. I think it should be mentioned, by the way, that Itach Ma'aki was instrumental in publicizing 1325 and getting it at the very early stages. And I think that should be mentioned. Thank you, Netta. Look, it's a very hard question. I thought when you said joint, I didn't know if you meant men and women together, or Israelis and Palestinians, or Jews and Arabs.
Israeli and Palestinian women who promote 1325.
No, look, it's a very difficult question. Naomi and I were instrumental, as I mentioned, in creating a Jerusalem link, and also the International Commission for a Just Peace in Israel. Clearly, I believe in joint action. I belong to Combatants for Peace, which is a joint Israeli-Palestinian peace organization against the occupation. So obviously, I personally believe in joint action, but we know that this is delicate. And I remember back in the days of the Jerusalem Link, I worked very closely with Zahira Kamal on women's issues, but it was very, very important for her to work in her community without Israelis. In other words, divorcing the 2 issues, not divorcing women's rights from the occupation, because it's already been discussed. And it was always and remains a problem for Palestinians, I think, is being accused of sisterhood over national interests or liberation. It's a very difficult question, but as the quote, the occupier, it's easy for me to say, but I think we should ask Huda. I'd like to hear what Huda or Naveen have to say about it.
They're both off the call.
I think they both left. I can say that I think it's not a good time for joint for open joint work of this kind. I don't know, I see Hind Khoury. Hind, would you like to comment on this?
Actually, I was trying to send you my question to save time. I didn't hear the last thing you said because I was trying to write. But I do want to raise an issue because I strongly believe that women can make a big difference, at least in our part of the world. Except that the ongoing conditions, especially with international governance, and I would like to add the hypocrisy of international governance, is the major obstacle. I mean, we have tons of UN Security Council resolutions that sit on the shelf, and really there's no serious pursuit to implement these resolutions. And while this is happening, it has been happening for a while, the last few years, we saw a most stunning kind of realpolitik, where might is right, where law doesn't mean anything. And look what's happening with the whole region, not only with Palestine. Look what's happening to people, the level of poverty, the immigration, etc., etc. So I think what we need to ask as women and create some force that's in my mind, whereby this hypocrisy has got to stop. I mean, who are they laughing at? I mean, we know it, and I think with the corona, with the technology, now more control of technology and more control of people, we are becoming even much more irrelevant with the technology, with the poverty, with the ongoing conflict. So while so much money is being spent on civil society organizations, women organizations, look what happened in Palestine, and look where we are. Why are we regressing so badly in terms of status and role and importance, while women, I think we have fantastic young generation of women. I mean, most impressive, we just saw Huda and Niveen, but these are just an example. And yet, the real status of women and the status of our lives, I mean, really is regressing terribly. So I would like to hear the take of these wonderful women that we heard today on this issue. How do we deal with an international community, international governments, and great powers who are so hypocritical? Thank you.
I would like to say something, if possible.
Yes, please, go ahead. But please introduce yourself.
My name is Noga. I'm an Israeli-born, and my mother is 9th generation, actually. I am also a Palestinian. My mother was born in Israel. She's gone already. But my great-grandparents also were born in Israel, in Palestine then. And my father is from Germany. He came during the Holocaust to Israel. And they joint venture, they got together to build a state for the Jews. And in spite this thing, and my brother was killed in the war. And in spite of this, we always believed in peace and that human beings are human beings no matter where they come from. And that we share a common world and common things. During 1973, in the war, my husband then was fighting in Sinai, and then the Americans stopped the war. I don't know what's the word for it. They stopped the war in the middle. The Israeli soldiers were sitting on one side of a river, of a little something water flow, and on the other side were sitting Egyptian Arabs. And when they stopped telling the soldiers to shoot, everybody put down their guns. After a while, they sat and drank coffee together, and then they played soccer. So what I'm saying is that governments shouldn't control our lives. It should be led by people who believe that human beings are human beings and that we're all equal and that we all deserve a good way of life. And I want to thank this panel. It was very, very touching to me and giving me a belief and that my grandchildren will not have to fight. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Could I address the question?
If I can just, 1 second, Vivian, if I can just jump in on 2 very quick points. I want to talk about Neta's question about joint or separate, etc.
Yeah.
And there's no answers to that, Neta. First of all, a great deal of the answer has to come from Palestinian women. And I think Israeli women should be guided by their wishes and their concerns and their needs on a day-to-day basis. Some work will be totally separate, as it should be. So we all have a lot of work in our societies. Some work will be parallel, and maybe a little bit might be joint when the time is ripe for that politically. But that question directly relates to Hind's question. Hind, I agree with you entirely. The international community devised an amazing document and washed its hand of the responsibility for implementing it or for accountability for its non-implementation.
We lost you, Naomi. You muted.
Somebody muted me, but that happens to me a lot. It's exactly on the point of the global connections, where a strong voice of women internationally from different areas, including Israelis and Palestinians, can say enough is enough. The issue of gender inequality is an outcome of political asymmetry. And if you don't get your act together, we will make sure that the basic structures of inequality, of gender inequality, are altered. And as Galia said quite correctly, and Ziad, hold your breath, I'm going to give you a compliment. As Galia said so correctly, gender inequality is not about men and women. It's about social change, equality, and justice, and men and women together can be feminists. And frankly, both women and men can be chauvinists. And you have to stack up on that internationally as well.
Thank you, Naomi. That was again very clear. Very important. We have two more people who would like to speak.
I just want to answer the question about joint activities or separate activities, because no Palestinian responded to this question.
I did.
May I? Okay. I think when you spoke about localizing 1325, it was you, maybe, Lucy. The problem is that the women organizations on the Palestinian side are not doing a good job in empowering women. They're not going down to the grassroots, to the average woman, talking to them, educating to them, awareing them of their rights and of things such as 1325. So this is maybe what you meant by localizing. It's an elite issue. Only a very small class of women know about it, but they don't go down on the ground and speak to other women about these things. This is one thing. About joint activities, I think any joint activity between Israelis and Palestinians, it should have a reference. and the reference should be a common ground, something that people agree upon. When Israeli women refuse to condemn occupation, to condemn war against Gaza, to condemn settlements, then how come can Palestinian women go to any joint activity with Israeli women? There are a few Israeli women, such Galia, Naomi, and a few others, which are strongly in this direction. But when you speak in general about Israeli organizations, Israeli women, they are not ready to take a clear, firm stand in very important issues for the Palestinians, such as ending the occupation, about Jerusalem, about the killings, about demolishing houses, about attacks on Gaza. And we missed this point. There was a time when there were activities, but when Israeli women refused to take a clear position on these principles, the whole issue of joint activities halted.
Thank you, Ziad. Maybe could we ask Vivian to speak and then Francis? I think we just, and then Hillel will close.
Thank you.
Unless there's any response from the speakers.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi, Galia, and hi to all my friends who are on this call. It's really such an important event, and I applaud PIG for putting this together and the Canaan Project as well. I'm really sorry that Huda was not able to stay on the call, because she would be able to tell us all about the upcoming joint event of Palestinian and Israeli women who are going to launch a joint Mothers Pact, which is a declaration, joint declaration, calling for both sides to enter negotiations for peace. This is a very brave step of a group of Palestinian women who have said, there has never been a time to work together. We have to put the, as Freud says, the minute differences of, I just lost the quote. It's a wonderful quote, but we have to be brave and say, this is the time. There is never a better time to prevent another death, another killing, the horrors of what is going on in the West Bank now by the settlers, the horrors of what's going on between Gaza and us. I live right on the border of the Gaza Strip. I feel it every day. This is the time, Lucy and Ziad and others, this is the time, and I invite you all to join us on September 22nd in honor of International Peace Day, Women Wage Peace, and a parallel sister group of Palestinian women who have not joined a one organization, because you're right, we have different needs, we have different culture, we have a different political reality, but we are working parallelly, and this is the time to make our voices heard. Thank you.
It's not enough to talk about peace. We should say clearly, end the occupation. End the occupation, end the occupation. This should be the headline for anything. But to say peace, peace, peace without defining what peace we want, it's bullshit. It's misleading. It's making business out of these things. So be courageous enough, say end the occupation, recognize the right of the Palestinian people for statehood, recognize the state of Palestine, evacuate the Jewish settlements. We are fed up of all these slogans which are taking us nowhere.
Thank you.
I want to I'll be very, very brief.
Thank you.
And I want to say
2 minutes.
Very, very brief. Of course, women like men have to start on a mutual recognition that domination is not a way forward. And therefore, they have to go forward saying we have to be equal entities. I regard us as Siamese twins in the Middle East, and neither can have self-determination without the other. These are two peoples that both deserve to have self-determination. We can't look to the rest of the world to give it to us. We have to look to ourselves to do this. I think women can be pivotal in doing it. And one of my experiences in the United Nations is seeing how women across cultural barriers, across philosophical barriers, ideological barriers, and religious barriers, join hands, not just the elites, also the women's organizations, which included women who were Dalits from India and women from the Amazon in Peru. And they are amazingly aware of the concept of feminism and of women's rights, but they are fighting against powerful male hierarchies, against juntas, against Taliban. It's not so easy. And Ziad, I don't agree about the idea that the Palestinian women are not talking to women below, however, not the elite. Also, Palestinian men don't seem to be able to do it, and it's a problem. But I do not agree. I think it's amazing the women I have heard who are first generation educated, who are sometimes not highly educated, speaking in the United Nations in one voice over cross cultures about the need to empower women and girls. So that's the message I want to bring back from far parts.
That's a terrific note on which to end. And I liked domination is not the way forward. That's a fantastic slogan that we can work with. I think now it's time for Hillel to wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone, our speakers, especially the journal, the supporters of the journal. Thank you all so much for this wonderful session. Hillel?
Yes, thank you, Lucy and Galia. And my essence of summary is first to say, wow, I think this has been an incredible, enlightening, important and inspiring discussion, which has been recorded, and therefore it will go far beyond just the people who are now present. I'd like to stress the fact that I think it's been mentioned before that this is the second issue that we've done on 1325. Here is the first one, which was done 10 years ago, Women in Power. And now 10 years later, here is the latest one, again, 1325. And people can see a selection of a large percentage of the articles on our website. It's clear that men haven't done a very good job of ending the occupation and resolving the conflict. And let us hope and let us assume that women may be able to do a better job. Although, as Galia said, the question is which women? Yeah. We, both women and men, have to work harder to make sure that the principles of 1325, which Francis described so clearly, will be implemented and in our region. And to conclude, on behalf of the Palestine-Israel Journal, Ziad and myself, I'd like to thank all of the speakers, Galia and Lucy, the moderators, and of course the audience as well. We all have a lot of work to do ahead of us. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, the moderators and the organizers. Thank you, Nico.
Thank you, Ina.
All the guests. See you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Om Shanti.
It was wonderful. Thank you all.